Hi there, fellow philosopher. In my opinion, it's good that you're here, which is perfect since in this video we will be looking at how my opinion and yours can mess with our mental well-being. This is the fifth and final video in the It's Not the Problem You Think series. The links to the other four are in the description below. So let's get to it. Have you ever noticed something strange about your worst moments? The thing you were actually upset about was rarely the thing that happened. One awkward sentence becomes, everyone thinks I'm an idiot. One rejection becomes, I'll always be alone. One failure, my whole life is falling apart. The original event lasted seconds. The suffering you built on top of it lasted days, weeks, maybe years. What if the pain isn't coming from your actual life? What if it's coming from the story you tell yourself about your life? And what if someone figured out exactly how this works 2,000 years ago? Here's something fascinating. Around 135 AD, a former slave living in a Greek city called Nicopolis started teaching a small group of students. His name was Epictetus. He had been tortured as a young man. His leg was deliberately broken by his master. He walked with a limp for the rest of his life. And he was, by every account, one of the calmest, most unshakably peaceful human beings who ever lived. He didn't write anything down. His student, Arion, took notes. And in those notes, right at the beginning of the Enchiridion, he wrote a sentence so compressed, so devastatingly precise, that it still explains almost every moment of human suffering 2,000 years later. It's not the things themselves that disturb men, but their opinions about them. That's it. That's the whole insight. And if you understand it fully, nothing about your emotional life will ever look the same. Let me show you what Epictetus actually meant. Because most people hear that quote and think, yeah, I know, think positive. That's not what he's saying at all. Here's the model. Something happens. Let's call it event A. Then you have an emotional reaction. Let's call it reaction C. Most of us believe A causes C. Someone insults me, so I'm angry. I get rejected, so I'm hurt. I failed, so I'm ashamed. But Epictetus noticed there's a step in between, an invisible step that happens so fast, you don't see it. He called it the opinion, the judgment, the story. Event A, then opinion B, then reaction C. The opinion is what the event means to you, and the meaning isn't in the event. It's assigned by your mind, automatically, instantly, based on everything you believe about yourself, about other people, and about how the world works. Someone doesn't text back. Event A. The opinion? They're losing interest. They don't care about me. I'm not important enough to respond to. That opinion creates the hurt, the anxiety, the spiraling. But the silence itself, the raw data, means nothing. It's just silence, no response yet. All the suffering came from your story your mind manufactured to explain the silence. And here's what's wild. The story might not even be true. Marcus Aurelius practiced this relentlessly. He was the emperor of Rome, the most powerful person in the world, and he spent his mornings writing in a journal, stripping the thoughts down to their bare components. He called it stripping away the legend. When you're angry at someone, strip away the story. What actually happened? They said words. Air vibrated. Sounds reached your ears. That's the event. Everything else, the insult, the disrespect, the injustice, those are opinions your mind added. When you're afraid of a future event, strip away the legend. What's actually happening right now, in this moment? You're sitting in a room, breathing. Nothing has happened yet. The fear is entirely about a story your mind is projecting onto a future that doesn't exist. This isn't suppression. The Stoics weren't telling you to feel nothing. They were telling you to feel accurately, to feel what the situation actually calls for, not what your embellished story calls it. A real loss deserves real grief. Real injustice deserves real anger. But most of what we suffer from isn't real loss or real injustice. It's manufactured stories, legends we told ourselves, opinions dressed up as facts. And the moment you see the gap between what happened and what you're telling yourself about what happened, you're free. Not from difficulty, from unnecessary difficulty, the self-inflicted kind. Here's what's remarkable. 4 philosophical traditions separated by centuries and oceans all discovered different versions of the same basic mechanism. The Stoics? It's not the event, it's your opinion of the event. Strip away the legend, see clearly, then act. The Skeptics? You're suffering because you're demanding certainty where none is available. Stop filling silence with stories you can't verify. Practice, I don't know. And notice how the tension releases when you stop forcing conclusions. The Epicureans. You're suffering because you attached your well-being to outcomes you may never get. The gap between what you have and what you've decided you need, that's the wound. Want without needing. You're suffering because you're demanding certainty where none is available. Stop filling silence with stories you can't verify. Practice, I don't know. And notice how the tension releases when you stop forcing conclusions. The Taoists? You're suffering because you're stirring the water, trying to force clarity through effort. Leave it alone. Let the mud settle. Peace is already there. You're just hiding it from yourself. Same discovery, 4 languages, 4 cultures, 4 sets of practical tools. And they converge on one uncomfortable truth. Your mind is a storytelling machine. And most of those stories are not true. But the good news is, you don't have to believe them. But if it's that simple, strip away the story, see clearly, stop suffering unnecessarily. Why doesn't everyone do it? Because the stories feel true. They feel like perception, not interpretation. That's the trick. The mind presents its opinions as facts, its interpretations as observations, its legends as reality. And it does this so fast, literally in milliseconds, that by the time you're aware of the feeling, the story has already been accepted as true. You're not asking, is this story accurate? You're already reacting to it as if it were. This practice isn't about stopping the stories. You can't. Your mind will generate them automatically, forever, because that's what minds do. The practice is about catching them, creating a gap between the story arising and you believing it. A small space where you can ask, is this true? Do I actually know this? Or am I filling silence with a narrative again? That space between the automatic story and the conscious choice to examine it is where every philosophy we've explored lives. It's the one skill behind the 4 traditions. Now, let's do our little experiment. After all, philosophy is just a bunch of words if you don't put it into practical use. This one is the culmination of everything we've covered in this 5-part series. The Skeptics taught us to question certainty. The Epicureans taught us to loosen our attachment to outcomes. The Taoists taught us to stop forcing. And now the Stoics are going to teach us to see clearly. I want you to think about something that's bothering you lately. Something specific. An interaction, a worry, a lingering resentment. Something where the emotional charge feels disproportionate to what actually happened. Go ahead and pause the video if you need some time. This is important, so take your time to choose. And as always, in the meantime, I'm going to take a 10-second coffee break. Okay, let's get started. Now that you have that situation firmly in your mind, I'm going to suggest you do something for the next week. I want you to carry on a simple practice. Whenever you feel a spike of negative emotion, anger, anxiety, shame, resentment, pause and answer 3 questions. Write them down because writing really changes things. Question 1. What actually happened? Not what it meant, not what it implies, not what might happen next. Just the bare facts. They didn't respond to my message. I made a mistake in the presentation. She said these specific words. Strip away the legend. Question 2. What story am I telling myself about what happened? This is where the opinion lives. They don't respect me. Everyone thinks I'm incompetent. She's trying to undermine me. Name the story exactly. Write it down. Look at it. Question 3. What's the gap between question 1 and question 2? Between the facts and the story? How much space is there? How much of your suffering came from the facts and how much came from the story? Most people discover the gap is enormous. The facts are small, manageable, often neutral. The story is where all the suffering lives. And the story, here's the liberating part. The story is yours. You didn't choose it consciously, but you can examine it. And once you see it clearly, it loses its power. You can dismiss it. We started this series with a question. Why does your mind feel like an enemy sometimes? Why do you replay conversations, chase outcomes that don't satisfy, force solutions that only make things worse, and suffer far more than the facts would seem to justify? 4 philosophers, 4 answers, 1 insight. The Skeptics showed us that overthinking is a demand for certainty, and peace comes when we learn to say, I don't know, without panic. The Epicureans showed us that emptiness is a demand for more, and peace comes when we learn to want what we already have. The Taoists showed us that relentlessness is a demand for control, and peace comes when we stop stirring and let the waters settle. And the Stoics showed us that suffering is a demand for a better story, and peace comes when we strip away the legend and see what's actually there. All of them, in their own way, were pointing at the same thing. Your mind is not your enemy. The stories it generates are not you. You are the one who can step back, examine the story, and choose whether to believe it. That's not suppression. That's not toxic positivity. That's clarity. And clarity, not happiness, not success, not the absence of problems. Clarity is what every one of these philosophers was after. Because when you see clearly, you respond appropriately. And when you respond appropriately, you don't add unnecessary suffering to necessary difficulty. That's the work. Not a one-time fix. It's a practice. Something you get a little better at each time you catch yourself. Pause and ask, is this true? Now, philosophy thrives in conversation and argument. Please add your comments below. Tell me, across this entire series, which philosophy hit you the hardest? Stoicism, skepticism, Epicurean, Taoism? And what one story you've been telling yourself that, if you're honest, might not be true? If you missed any of the other videos, they're linked in the description below. And remember, in all things and at all times, be a philosopher.